Doings of Doyle is sponsored by Belanger Books, home of the best Sherlock Holmes anthologies featuring today's top Sherlockian authors. Belanger Books is the only authorised publisher of Solar Ponds mysteries, continuing the Sherlock Holmes legacy into the 21st century. Visit them today at belangerbooks.com. Welcome to Doings of Doyle, a podcast dedicated to the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Professor Challenger, Brigadier Gerard, and, of course, Sherlock Holmes. I'm Mark Jones.
And I'm Paul Chapman, and together we'll be exploring Doyle's eclectic bibliography to understand more about the great man's life and work. We'll be discussing his fiction and non-fiction, the well-known and the obscure.
And stopping by Baker Street along the way. You can find out more at doingsofdoyle.com or follow us at Doings of Doyle on Twitter. Hello and welcome to episode 24. Today, Paul and I are delighted to be joined by Ross Davies to talk about the new hub of Doylean activity, that is the ACD Society. Ross is a professor of law at George Mason University in Washington, D.C., where he teaches administrative law, civil procedure and legal history. He's the editor of the Green Bag, an entertaining journal of law, and its sister publications, which often touch on Doylean topics. He's an avid Sherlockian and Doylean, and a member of the Baker Street Irregulars with the entirely fitting investiture of The Temple. And his most recent work includes editing a masterpiece of villainy, the BSI manuscript edition of The Adventure of the Norwood Builder. And he's, well, something or other in the ACD Society. Ross, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
And we'll start with a very basic question, Ross. Is how did you first become involved and interested in the Sherlockian and the Doylean world?
Well, I think this is probably a two-part answer. And the first part, as with so many of us, goes back to days before my hair was gray. My mother, when her children and my father's children were very young, used to read great literature to us in the tent at night when we were camping during summer times. And that, of course, included G.K. Chesterton and E. Nesbit and Arthur Conan Doyle. And the first nightmare that I can recall involved a speckled band. But she was a great reader, and of course the stories were great, and I've enjoyed them ever since. In later years, when editing the Green Bag, this law journal, I wanted to do a special issue of one of our sister publications called the Green Bag Almanac that focused on Conan Doyle and the law. And at that time, for whatever reason, I had no awareness whatsoever of the Sherlockian Doylean world as a fan and literary community. I had simply never touched it. It's not that I was unaware of fan communities. I was involved in the Tolkien world, for example. But what I did was I called a friend who I knew to be a fellow enthusiast of this, a judge on the highest court of appeals in the state of New York, and asked her about this. And her reply to me was, as I recall, I would love to be involved with this, Ross, but I have a colleague on the bench named Albert Rosenblatt. Do you know Judge Rosenblatt? And I said, yes. And she said, I think he knows more about this than I do. So I called up Judge Rosenblatt, who I knew slightly at that point, and asked him whether he had any interest in this. And if you know Judge Rosenblatt, he is a model of kindness and gentleness, as well as a brilliant lawyer. And there's this long pause on the phone, and he says, Ross, I have some friends I'd like to introduce you to. And it was, of course, the Baker Street Irregulars, and I was immediately sucked into that vortex. It was a descent into the maelstrom, but I've never come back up. And that was about a half dozen years ago. And since then, it's been just a sort of a long, wonderful, joyful ride. And in the course of that, I became aware of, among other things, the great work of Chris and Barbara Roden with the original Arthur Conan Doyle Society, and became a great fan of their work as well.
Yeah. So let's pick up on the society side of things, because the ACD Society itself is not a Well, there used to be a Conan Doyle Society, as you mentioned, back in the 90s. So why do you think it's important that there's a new society now?
Well, the same reasons that that applied in the 1980s, 90s, early 2000s for having the original society still apply today, and that is that Arthur Conan Doyle is a great literary figure. He's not only a great writer and a great entertainer and a great thinker, but an important cultural force, an enduring cultural force. We should be paying attention to him and his work. And that's easier for people to do if there's some sort of organized or semi-organized structure for doing this. And so it was a great thing when the Rodens got this started decades ago. And it's important to keep their work going. And by the way, it's also great fun, although I know I'm preaching to the choir.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. So the new society, how did that come about then?
The provenance of that is very easy. It's all because of Cliff Goldfarb and John Lellenberg, who called a meeting a couple of years ago in New York during the BSI's January weekend to talk with a bunch of people who they thought might be interested in doing something like this, about doing something like this. And so that ended up sort of informally and with Cliff Goldfarb's blessing, and shortly before he passed, also with John Lellenberg's blessing, for us to do this the way we have done it. And in fact, Cliff is deeply involved in this, and John would have been if he were still around, I am sure. And a number of the other people who were at that initial meeting in New York are involved as well. So all credit to Cliff and John for, in a sense, using the tinder of the original Arthur Conan Doyle Society to spark a new fire.
Yeah.
Yes, with the new society, Ross, the old society ran along the lines of having a full journal. They didn't have a committee per se, but there was a regular team around Chris and Barbara, of contributors and so on. Why have you've decided with the new setup there's not going to be a regular publication or a committee? Is there any specific reason for choosing that sort of approach?
I think there are two, really. One, lightheartedly, is personal, and one more seriously is institutional. And the lighthearted one is running a journal is a lot of work, and I'm not particularly interested in work. But the other is that the informal, undocumented, but genuine mission of the ACD Society is to be, and I think it was, I can't remember whether it was you or Mark who at the very beginning of our conversation today referred to a hub. But the ACD Society does not aspire to be a great weighty organization in its own right. It inspires to coordinate and to encourage and to incubate good work of other folks. And part of the motivation for that goes back to your earlier question about ACD himself, which is that he is truly an odd character in literary history, in that his most popular creations are as popular as the greatest cartoon characters in literary history, right? And yet what he viewed, and some scholars do, as his weightiest, most significant, most intellectually impressive works are as great as the works of some great novelists and historians. And so ACD invites a community of true scholars, true fans, and true fan-scholars and true scholar-fans.
Yeah.
And the question is, how do all of those various superatomic particles exist in one container, right? The answer is probably it ain't going to happen, because it's at the same time too big and too volatile. And so what the ACD Society aspires to do is encourage all of those things at one time. And that means not doing everything itself at one time. In addition, as a simple matter of institutional realism, the world doesn't need another great Doylean podcast. Right? It's already got one, right? At a more gestational stage, but still with great promise, there is the the Conan Doyle Review,
Mm.
a serious, sort of traditionally structured scholarly journal about Conan Doyle's work. We don't need two of those, at least not at this stage. The community isn't large enough to accommodate that kind of thing at this point. And so, in terms of being a hub for the collection and study of Doylean material, do we really need another entity trying to horn in on what's going on in Toronto with the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle collection there? Does Portsmouth Library really need our help? No. What's needed is, or what we thought was needed, and the initial response suggests it was, is someone to encourage all of these groups to interact more.
Yeah.
And to do that in sort of an easy, friendly, comfortable way. And so the ACD Society does have a publication, but it's a tiny 3 or 4 times a year oversized postcard that flags interesting things, right? We hope to organize, with any luck, starting next year, a conference once every couple of years. But again, part of the idea behind the conference is to organize the darn thing and then turn over chunks of the agenda directly to other Doylean organizations. So, for example, the tentative plan for our first conference involves the Conan Doyle Review owning a couple of the panels.
Yeah.
We don't know who's going to be on the panels. It doesn't matter who's on the panels as far as the ACD Society is concerned. What matters is the participation of good and interested people from the ACD Society. We're hoping, and I'm going to do this in the midst of an answer that almost has to appear on air, that we're hoping that the keynote speakers will be named Chapman and Jones.
Oh, heavens.
But that's where we're coming from.
Yeah. And I think that the thing that I find very uplifting about the society is the fact that it has that kind of community spirit to it. I mean, in fact, looking at the strapline of the society, it's a community dedicated to studying and enjoying the works of Conan Doyle. And it's been pretty heated over the last few years in other circles and other fandoms about gatekeeping and things like that. But actually, the approach and the mentality here has been much more about, if you're here to support and encourage and promote the work of Conan Doyle as a great literary figure, as a campaigner, as a important public figure, you can do that in your own way, and we will make the connections and we will promote your work as much as anybody else's, which I think is a wonderfully warm-hearted way of approaching the life of a great figure like this.
I agree with that sensibility about gatekeeping.
Yeah.
In fact, part of what makes the timing of this sort of nice in a way is that a lot of the gates in fandom and in academia are not things that were built by people who were trying to build gates.
Yeah, quite.
They are after effects of other cultural phenomena. But today we tend to be a bit more aware of the potential for intentionally or unintentionally building these gates and so on and so forth, which also opens the opportunity to intentionally not build the gates.
Yes.
And that's part of what we aspire to with this.
Yeah. And I think you can see that kind of spirit of inclusion and openness in one of the things that we wanted to talk about today, which is the ACD Society inaugural, I can't even say it, the ACD Society inaugural honours, which took place in January. So tell us a bit about how that came about.
You're spot on. That is, in some ways, the active symbol or marker of this approach to the Doylean community writ large, is that we want to celebrate good work about Conan Doyle across the spectrum. And so within sort of our limited capacities and resources, we set up something that looks and quacks largely just like traditional literary cultural honors. We have selection committees for various subjects. We have, again, in the traditional academic sense, we have genuine but minuscule cash awards. We have what we like to think of as attractive certificates. We have a ceremony. We have all those basic structural elements that people are familiar with, are comfortable with, and recognize as facets of being taken seriously.
Mm.
But then the categories in which we give honors are fiction and poetry, but also scholarly writing, performing in visual arts, but also lifetime service.
Yeah.
And who knows, how these will evolve in the future. But we're covering everything from community building to ancient and modern performance, to fiction and poetry, to to sort of conventional scholarship, and we are measuring them all by their own distinctive standards, but holding them all and recognizing levels of excellence in all of them.
Yeah.
And then in the honors themselves, you have great academic work by people like Douglas Kerr, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right next to great, clever, modern use of the internet visual arts by Bonnie MacBird,
Mm-hmm.
right? In fact, the first Lifetime Service Award went to Christopher Roden, the founder of the original Arthur Conan Doyle Society, and so it's Gretchen Altabef for a great sort of Sherlockian time travel story. But they're all really good work, each in their own category. And then if you look at the selection committees for each of these, they quite properly look and quack and have the lovely odor, right, or however it is you want to say this, of the kind of people that people receiving those honors would like to be recognized by. So we have first-rate scholars looking for good scholarship. We have first-rate writers and publishers looking for first-rate fiction and poetry, and so on and so on.
Well, I was lucky enough to catch up with a couple of those first-rate writers who offered their thoughts on receiving their Doylean honours. So here first up is Gretchen Altabef, and then we'll hear from Bonnie MacBird.
Derrick Belanger nominated my story, Sir Arthur and the Time Machine, for the Arthur Conan Doyle Society's Doylean Honours in Fiction and Poetry. The story was published in Sherlock Holmes' Further Adventures in the Realms of H.G. Wells for Bellinger Books. I write about heroes and heroines in the art of true justice. Human heroes with human abilities. Genius is a human ability. Friendship is a human ability. Love is a human ability. I write Sherlock Holmes novels, and I take great joy in adding to these heroic stories something Dr. Doyle left out, the history of the women of the day. Sir Arthur and the Time Machine is my first sci-fi short story. It is an outside-the-box experience for me, imagining Sir Arthur Conan Doyle making use of H.G. Wells' time machine in order to solve his 19th century dilemma, chiefly a cure for tuberculosis. Doyle's travel into the future becomes an odyssey through time, and one involving his relationship to Sherlock Holmes. Derrick Belanger, on behalf of the ACD Society, sent me an email announcing my win. Indeed, I was very surprised to receive the award. I was amazed, ecstatic, overjoyed, and of course, humbled by this momentous honor. Grateful beyond measure to be so celebrated by the ACD Society, and as an author of Sherlock Holmes, it was a wonderful way to begin 2022.
I was thrilled to win this award. I had no idea this was coming. And, I didn't even think I was going to be able to attend remotely because I'm in London, but I thought I would dial in. But it happens that I was en route to my husband's doctor's appointment in a cab when the actual ceremony was taking place. I thought I was going to miss it. I thought, oh, what the heck? I'll try and see if I can connect in through my phone. And I did. And they started talking about it. And the first one up was mine. And I thought they were just listing them all. I didn't realize I'd won, I'm in the cab and I go, yay!
Yeah. So tell us a bit about the actual production for which you won. I think you can see it still now on YouTube, can't you?
Oh yes, it's absolutely up on YouTube, and if you search Modern Major Super Sleuth, you find it quickly. And it's it was a concept. We decided to tag it on at the end for fun to a Zoom production I did of the Blue Carbuncle for the Sherlock Holmes Society of London, their big event in January. which was of course online because of the pandemic. So I thought it would be fun, in the tradition of British theater, where you sometimes end with a musical number randomly, sometimes completely unconnected to the show. That one we'll do a little Gilbert and Sullivan. And it happens that my Holmes and Watson are extremely good singers, and then I had the concept of sticking Mycroft in there as well. That actor has played Javert on Broadway and national tour.
Wow!
And the two others are pros also that have been on stage quite a lot. And I was just so lucky because not everyone can handle Gilbert and Sullivan patter songs. But what's interesting is that the three singers, Holmes, Mycroft, and Watson, are singing in their bedrooms. One in LA and one in Chester and one in London. so that, and then they're cut together and so forth.
Now, sadly, neither Gretchen nor Bonnie could make it to the ceremony in person, but I was lucky enough to be there in Manhattan and to live stream and record the event, and you can find the link in the show notes. And the venue was Otto Penzler's Mysterious Bookshop, one of the most celebrated venues in New York City. So, Ross, how did the venue come about?
Oh my, this is true of I think all literary endeavors, right? Is that they need friends who have more gravitas than the organizers do. And Otto Penzler, who's the founder, the proprietor of the Mysterious Bookshop and the Mysterious Press, and all sorts of other literary enterprises and frolics and detours of various sorts, and a world-class literary collector in his own right, is a very kind and generous person and a true cosmopolitan. And I asked him if he would be willing to elevate this puny, at least for now, literary society by letting us hold our Doylean honors ceremony in his shop in Manhattan, in New York City. And not only did he say yes, he provided coffee and donuts and set up chairs and was a wonderful host. Yes, so the inaugural Doylean honors ceremony was held in one of the greatest bookshops in the world. And what could be better than that?
Yeah, absolutely. And while I was in the Mysterious Bookshop, I was able to ask Otto about his reasons for supporting the honours, and also to talk to one of the judges, Derrick Belanger, about his experience of serving on one of the committees.
I've been a Sherlockian for most of my adult life, or all of my adult life, and when Ross Davies decided that he wanted to start this wonderful Arthur Conan Doyle Society award ceremony, he came to me because we have an open house here every year for the Baker Street Irregulars and other Sherlockians, and I was so happy to bring him in because I think sometimes Conan Doyle may not get quite enough credit, whereas all the credit goes to Watson, but he gets a lot of help from the agent. And so we were thrilled, and look at the room was full of people who appreciate Conan Doyle, and it was just a joy to be here and to be part of the initial ceremony.
This is Derrick Belanger from the Fiction and Poetry Committee. The experience of working with an international team and reading over these stories was just, it was excellent. Most of the writing was brilliant. Most of the stories were worthy of the honor, and working with the committee and whittling it down and deciding which was the best three was great. And we very much wanted a rubric so that we kept things fair as we looked at the stories. And some stories where we really liked them, but because of certain things, like maybe it was too much of a Sherlock Holmes story, it didn't quite win. But the three stories that won, we all agreed were the three best. So it was great. The committee members are very nice. Jay Ganguly is just fantastic to work with, and I'm looking forward to our submissions for next year, and we're really hoping that we get some poems in there this time.
What I particularly like about what you're doing with this, Ross, is the fact that there is this recognition of Conan Doyle in a wider sense. we can all fully understand why Sherlock Holmes dominates the Sherlockian universe, but it does overshadow the other work, and it is great to see some recognition of that work without dismissing the Sherlockian side of it, as all his work is of value and worth studying, and let's bring this stuff out of the shadows a bit.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, that's this gets back to something else we talked at the beginning as well. There is so much more fun to have with Conan Doyle than just the Sherlock Holmes stories, and using just the Sherlock Holmes stories in the sense of the fact that they are a slice of his work, not that they are somehow inferior work. They're great literature in their own right, and they're full of all sorts of interesting stuff. Yeah, I think, I know for a fact that when thinking about how to formulate that little line that's on the web, the ACD Society's website about sort of the mission, the role of the ACD Society, what was ringing not just in my ears, but in the ears of other people I was talking with about this, is that what the ACD Society is doing is it's visiting all sorts of places and people in Conan Doyle's world and stopping by Baker Street along the way. In other words, I think that the ACD Society and Doings of Doyle are very much kindred spirits in this.
Definitely.
We have a world of respect for Conan Doyle's work writing the Sherlock Holmes stories, and we have a blast reading them and reading pastiches and seeing the latest interpretations on film and on radio. But that does not take away from our great joy, not only with the popular but not as popular as Sherlock Holmes Doylean classics, the Professor Challenger work, the Brigadier Gerard stuff. But there is so much there to be enjoyed.
I think, again, well, hopefully this will come out with the work that you're doing is with reading the wider Doylean sphere. For instance, if you read the short stories with a more gothic tinge and the Challenger stories, they actually enrich. If you go back to the Sherlock stories, they enrich your understanding and reading of the Sherlock stories and put them within a context of the writer himself.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And they are, if Bram Stoker is in some ways a gateway drug to the Gothic and the horror for many modern readers, Conan Doyle is a gateway drug to Stoker, or directly into that world himself. And so, yes, discovering that the guy who wrote great stories about detective fiction wrote equally great stories about other, in other fields and on other themes, is a way for people to expand their minds, their experiences, their joys in literature from what might be called a safe Sherlockian space.
Yes, yes.
And that appreciation of Conan Doyle as a great writer, perhaps underappreciated among the pantheon of great writers, is something that came up in conversation with Otto and Bonnie.
Well, to some degree, I don't think that there would be a pantheon of great writers if it weren't for Conan Doyle, because it is the Sherlock Holmes stories that popularized mystery fiction. Edgar Allan Poe invented it, essentially, but Conan Doyle popularized it. And if it wasn't popular, there wouldn't have been so many publishers trying to do it, so many writers trying to fill in that gap. And I think the entire genre would be much less than it is now because of Conan Doyle.
He's vastly underrated as a writer. I mean, he should be in the pantheon with, Poe and Robert Louis Stevenson. I mean, he's both an adventure writer and a mystery thriller writer, and I think that because he straddles those two kind of, and then of course he did historic fiction, but I think his really successful stuff was the mystery and the adventure. And then the Holmes stuff itself are adventures, actually.
Yeah.
He calls them that, and they really are, because they are filled with action. We have the vision of him, Holmes sitting in a chair with his hands steepled and, thinking of things. But frankly, he's out there a lot. But anyway, so Conan Doyle, back to Conan Doyle, he was really writing adventures that were crossed over with this other thing. Plus the fact that he's invented the single most famous literary creation of all time.
Yeah.
Should put him there. He's vastly underrated. And I can say that as a Conan Doyle emulator, somebody who's trying to evoke the style as much as I can in my books, I've just, my admiration for what he does has grown immeasurably. I mean, it is really hard what he did, but man, he could plot. His characters were stellar. They just popped right off the page. His dialogue was better than almost anyone of his era. And he was considered to write cinematically, even predating cinema, because he was so visual. And that's, I think, because of he's an artist. His father was an artist, his uncle was an artist. And because he had this artistic background, he saw the thing in his head, like we project a movie in our mind. I'm a screenwriter, so I definitely see a movie when I'm writing, but his stuff is really so crisp and visual. It makes it so readable. Anyway, that stuff is underrated. Sometimes it's tossed up like, oh, it's cinematic, it's shorthand or whatever. It's like, no, that's hard to do. The other kind of magic thing, secret magic of Arthur Conan Doyle, is he has what we now call narrative drive, that thing that makes you turn the page. And it's really hard to quantify or qualify what that is, but it's some kind of, it has to do with the plotting, it has to do with the pacing, but it also has to do with how the characters, grab you by the neck and drag you in. And there's something about his writing that's very hard to emulate, but is just so masterful.
Otto and Bonnie there, I think, beautifully capture Conan Doyle's importance as a writer, which is one part, the most visible part of his legacy. But we often talk about him on the podcast as a doctor, as a campaigner, as a historian. And it seems to me that the ACD Society, with its rounded view of Conan Doyle, almost facilitates that broader appreciation of his life and work.
Yes, I'm glad you see it that way. And that is a big part of what we aspire to do. If Sherlock Holmes is the wardrobe, then the ACD Society is the missing back at the end of the wardrobe. Right? We're not the world beyond the back, but we're a way in, or we encourage that. There are all these things about Conan Doyle, I think, for each of us as a reader, that touch us personally, that resonate with us at some level beyond appreciation of great literature, because he was such a wide-ranging person and such a humane literary figure and scholar and cosmopolitan human being. Conan Doyle presents a real problem for the ivory tower and our traditional culture, because the traditional literary scholar is someone who knows everything about an author. You go ahead and try to do that with Conan Doyle.
Yeah.
He is in some ways distinctively unsuited to traditional scholarly treatment, because there's just too much of him. Not that he's necessarily written more than some other folks, but he's written so broadly in such diverse ways, right? And then if you do think you've gotten a handle on all of his literature, then he enters the ether. What do you do with that, right? And so he's hard to deal with that way. And it may well be that the very nature of the organization that the ACD Society and you all and the Friends of the Conan Doyle Collection in Toronto, the fact that our work has to be so diverse and so welcoming of things that the principals don't understand and don't know very much about, that it will create a different kind of hub, in a sense, a different kind of hotbed of study and appreciation than most other authors get, but that will still have enough of the same flavor to be treated as seriously as Austen scholarship or Dickens scholarship or what have you.
Yes, so having established the society and the awards, Ross, are you happy with the reaction that you've had so far? Has it been very positive and welcoming, and really looks to the growth of Doylean scholarship in the future?
I would say yes, and then yes again in all caps, for a couple of reasons. The first one is getting something like this off the ground is to some extent a matter of just leaping and hoping that you have enough friction with the air not to splat when you hit the ground. And I was hoping against hope that we would have at least one nominee in each category. And it turned out to be much more than that. It turned out to be, in the best sense for something like this, more work than we'd expected. At the same time, and it's funny, I was talking with, and I'm pleased to say this, yesterday, with a new member of our scholarly writing committee, Maria Fleischock, who is a formidable figure in her own right, talking with her about the fact that there is German language Doylean scholarship out there, right? And it's not out there. It's that we're not, people like us talking on, an English language podcast are not necessarily exposed to that the way we should be. So we need to be doing more of that. So did we get a great response? Yes. Did the committees have, for the most part, great fun? Although, of course, it was work going through these things. Absolutely. Is there more to be done? Absolutely. And in fact, in the first year, and this is something that I had no idea was going to happen. And my impression is that Jay and Derrick had no idea this was going to happen. But the interest and enthusiasm among the committee members for the fiction and poetry section was such that the fiction and poetry committee members on their own generated Japanese, German, Czech, and I believe French language versions of their nomination form.
Wow.
Just because.
Yeah, fantastic.
And the just because there is just because Doyle really is a global literary cultural figure. And we are being parochial by having an English language program. And so we are already in our second year confronting the challenge of how do you consider nominees in languages that you don't have? And the main way we do that in academia traditionally is by having language and culture experts on the selection committee. And so yes, it went wonderfully in year one, but it showed up very much just how much further we have to go.
Yeah.
And you'd hope as well that Doyle himself would be absolutely delighted with this. As you said earlier, being a cosmopolitan figure himself, and something Mark and I are very keen to highlight is the fact that he spoke French, he spoke German, he read those languages. He was someone who went out in the world, and we saw there was a world out there, and would have been delighted that his own work was a worldwide phenomenon, not just limited to the Anglo-Saxon world and the English-speaking world.
Absolutely. Yes.
So what else is coming up for the Society in the future? You mentioned about possible conference,
yes.
But what else is going on at the moment?
Oh, golly, what else is going on at the moment? Well, at this moment, and many of these are things that I want to make this absolutely clear up front, that the ACD Society is not taking credit for these things.
No.
Okay? That's a big part of what this is about, right? Is about all of us, people who love this stuff, working together and just bumping into each other. But we're looking forward to seeing the first issue of the Conan Doyle Review. Ashley Polasek with Marielle Caro and Kate Bromley as the other editors, coming out sometime next year, I think. I think they're hoping, although all of the editors are very busy, so who knows exactly what the date will be. We're looking forward to seeing that within sort of the tiny structure of the ACD Society itself. There is this conference we're working on, and we do have this postcard periodical that we publish. And last year we published the cover of the bound manuscript of a fabulous story, the Terror of Blue John Gap, with a very nice, thank you very much, Paul, introduction by
Thanks
Paul
for asking me.
That was sort of the trigger to, and again, this is part of, I guess, how informally how the ACD Society operates and hopes to continue to operate, is that once we had that cover and once we had someone of Paul Chapman's standing associating himself with this, it was much easier to recruit Margie Deck and Nancy Holder to take responsibility for what's going to be a unique approach to publishing a Conan Doyle manuscript, which is that the color cover of those postcards over the next couple of years are going to feature, over time, all of the pages of the Blue John Gap manuscript, each page accompanied by commentary by at least one distinguished Doylean. So that, how long will it take? 3-4 years, maybe, with a couple of extra special issues of the journal to get through some of the pages. But within a few years, a subscriber to this postcard journal will have a complete full color reproduction of a Conan Doyle manuscript. And in the background, while Deck and Holder have been getting this underway, I've been working with them to develop a companion webpage for Blue John Gap that will, as they issue their pages, post those manuscript images online with longer versions of the commentary and associated links and other pictures and
fabulous,
obscure illustrations, and on about Blue John Gap. And so we have that coming down the pike. One of the things that I know at least 2 of the committees are talking about is the Doylean Honors Committees is dividing, as we anticipate growing interest and attention, dividing those awards into more categories. So we will probably end up honoring a more wide-ranging and diverse kinds of scholarship and fan work and literary work in the future.
Brilliant.
So we got stuff going on.
Yeah, just a little. And how do people get involved if they want to join the society?
Okay, the easiest way to do this is to go to acdsociety.com. And the reason it's .com is because the ACD Society really is being run on a shoestring. And at the time we registered for the website, .com was, believe it or not, cheaper than the .org or the .edu. So we're acdsociety.com. Technically, it's a division of the Green Bag, which is the nonprofit that publishes the Green Bag and so on and so forth. But basically, it's just a literary society that is squeaking by. And pretty much everything we do goes on the website for free. So again, part of not having any gatekeeping that we don't need is there's no gate to being part of this. If you want the print edition of the postcard and sort of the other sort of material things that go with that, those cost money. So we need to charge money. And on the website, you'll find you can join for, I think it's $10 US a year. And you get the stuff that we make in the mail. But so feel free to join and pay if you want the material as well as the ephemeral version of the ACD Society, but you don't need to spend any money to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's brilliant. Well, look, Ross, it's been fantastic to talk to you. We're so delighted to have you on the podcast, and it's brilliant to hear more about what the ACD Society is doing. Best luck with it in the future.
Absolutely.
And we hope to hear from you again and have you back on the podcast soon.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Paul. It's been a real pleasure. Great fun.
That's for us too. Thanks, Ross.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
It was lovely to hear from Ross and great to have him on the podcast. And I think there's so much stuff coming down the track now from the ACD Society. There's a lot for us to all look forward to, I think.
Yeah, and it's just wonderful to see this growth of interest in the wider world of Conan Doyle, and long may it last. And this recognition that there was far more to this man than Sherlock Holmes, and Sherlock Holmes is always will be the centre of this world. But we do need to know more about the other stuff he wrote, and as I was saying to Ross there, the way that it can enhance your enjoyment of the Sherlock Holmes stories and the Sherlock Holmes milieu, reading Conan Doyle's wider works and learning, of course, more about the man himself.
And we should also pay tribute to Ross for being the sort of unofficial conductor of this Doylean orchestra that is the ACD Society, because it always needed somebody to get people talking, so that we can really grow that as a scholarly community.
Yeah, it's the enthusiasm that Ross has is absolutely wonderful, and it's difficult to get these sort of things going, and it is, to use the old saying, it is like herding cats, quite definitely. And when you get somebody of enthusiasm who can assemble teams around them, and then they in their turn can go out and enthuse other people, it seems to be working very well.
Yeah. So that brings us to the end of this podcast. We hope that you've enjoyed the conversation with Ross today. You can find out more about the ACD Society and all the related activities on the Doings of Doyle website at doingsofdoyle.com. If you would like to support the podcast, you can do so by either leaving a rating or review, which really helps other people find the podcast, or you can consider becoming a patron at patreon.com. And what have we got on the podcast next time, Paul?
Next time, talking about Sherlock Holmes, we will be investigating the mystery of the creeping man.
Excellent. So we look forward to seeing you again at the next podcast. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Goodbye.